We're gonna have some fun tonight, so I'm glad you guys could make it. I'll have Shannon go ahead and get started in just a minute. She's getting everybody logged in. Deanne, do you want to go ahead and kick us off with our movement mortgage?
Hi, everyone. Deanne Yellum over at Movement Mortgage. I hope you're all happy this wonderful Monday. Last week, we had some amazing reports. It looks like the inflation numbers are under control. The consumer price index came in lower than, or I should say better than we expected. And the mortgage markets had almost an all-time impact on what happened to interest rates, at least a half of a point across the board.
Yay.
So that looked good. Hopefully we'll go into 2023 with some optimism. And anyway, so go sell because things are looking up in the finance world.
Good. Thank you for the update on that. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the top 10 reasons seller will counter your offer. This is kind of a fun one that I decided to put on. As Shannon and I were talking with a few of you, you know what? We haven't done a good enough job, I think, training you on how to counter an offer. And so I'm going to attempt to do that tonight, giving you the top 10 reasons that a seller will counter. And that's after looking at about 100 contracts. I just went through quickly, looked at some of the unique counter points and came up with the top 10 based on the amount of countering that took place. And I think you'll find it fascinating. It's not always about price. And I think at the end of this session, you'll get to see what are some ideas maybe you haven't considered, or maybe some different ways to position your buyer or your seller, and things maybe you have not thought of before to win the deal. So glad to have all of you here. If you joined us for the first time, if you have a question, you can certainly use our chat. We do have some regulars that jump on these Monday night webinars, and they are certainly happy to communicate or give some ideas or answer your questions as I talk. And I know I talk fast, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into slide number 1. Awesome, summary. So every state, we are operating in Washington and Idaho at this time. The expiration of your offer is going to determine when the seller has, the ability to respond. I think that's probably where you want to think about. If you're just jumping into this and you're like, how do I write my offer so that I maybe get a counter offer and I don't upset the seller? Really start from the expiration. When do you think that seller, or when do you think that listing agent will be able to respond to your offer? And if it's, if it's the default, it's Washington residential, it's 9 p.m. on the second day is the expiration of a counter offer. But from the point of writing the offer, you may not even need, if you look at the last bullet point I have here on the slide, the offer expiration date is often countered because it becomes like, if I sent an offer in today and I put the offer expiration date of today, that expires at 9 p.m. if it's Washington residential, if the offer expiration date is stated on the contract. So I could counter you, but if it's already dead in the water, it's already dead, it's already past 9 p.m., then I've got to reinstitute and basically counter offer and create a lot more work on the paperwork side of things. So, think about your best tips and tricks. Make sure you talk with the listing agent, or you talk with them about kind of when will you be able to present the offer. Now, if I'm countering your offer, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, in Washington, 9 p.m. on the second date is the default unless I specify otherwise. Idaho, you actually fill in the date and the time. And in commercial, it's the second day at 5 p.m. So there's a lot of confusion on like, okay, when does my counter offer expire? Those are the defaults. That's what you're working with. And as we kind of go through the slides, you'll get the flavor of the day, but you do control that as a listing agent if you're countering the buyer's offer. You can play that game of how much time does this buyer need? Do I want to play their game back at them, and have them quickly respond? Or maybe I give them some more time to kind of get some more numbers or to talk with their lender. There is a strategy around the expiration of your counteroffer. So what's not a counteroffer? I want to be very clear. A counteroffer is not changing the buyer or seller name. Like say you had an undisclosed seller. If you have to go back and change the name, that is not a counteroffer. In fact, if I was to put as, as recorded or something like that, I mean, I don't know the seller's name, that doesn't show that I've done a good job in preparing my offer. Hopefully you know the seller's name or you can look that up, but that does not, it's not a counteroffer in Washington. FERPTA and seller disclosures also are not a counteroffer in Washington. And text messages, I know I've received a few calls from some of you with like, I got this text message, kind of oddball, you know, is this a counteroffer? And it is not. Text messages are not considered in writing. Emails would be considered in writing. Offers would be considered in writing, but text messages are not. So think of text messaging as like you're having a phone conversation, you're kind of batting some ideas around with the other agent. That would be a text message, but that is not a counteroffer. So I want to make very clear about that. Everything has to be in writing. So make sure that, you know, if you are going to counteroffer something, it has to be in writing. You should use, I saw a lot of really good Best Choice Realty cover letters when offers were presented, and I could tell from the conversations and the exchanges between the parties when I received the offers and reviewed those files. The other agent really liked to see that professionalism. So if you have not used a Best Choice Realty cover letter in the past, you may want to consider using it. It is available in Transaction Desk, or if you'd like our Best Choice Realty cover letter, we can certainly provide that to you in the state of Idaho. It definitely gives you a nice professional edge. Also, if you're considering an offer or a counteroffer, you might want to consider, you know, where's the proof of funds? With everything going on, as Deanne kind of alluded to, with the marketplace kind of going through, you know, some challenges with the inflationary numbers and the interest rates, it puts a lot of strain on that negotiation relationship that's formed. And so proof of funds can oftentimes kind of clear the air and put you in a very good position, either from a buyer's agent that's providing the proof of funds, or from a listing agent asking for the proof of funds. It definitely shows that you are looking for a qualified buyer. And that's what we're looking for, is that win-win between the parties. Offer expiration date, as I said, you know, some companies are ending up putting on their offer expiration date. They're putting offer date plus 1 day. They're giving basically time for 1 day for that offer to be submitted, and you know, that would be okay. Somebody asked me also this last week, and it's been a while since we've talked about it, is can I not have an offer expiration date on my contract in Washington? And I said, you actually do not need an offer expiration date. You can have it be open-ended, but you would need to withdraw your offer if your client found something else or ended up writing something else on another property. So you can write it without a date, but it's not advised to do so. But as the market starts to switch gears and it becomes more of a buyer's market, you may want to lowball and not have a day on the offer expiration and allow that seller to have time to review all the financials, the pre-approvals, their pricing, do all of that. And that is a strategy as well. You may not need that. Here's a sample of an Idaho counteroffer. As you notice from Idaho, you cannot cross stuff off, and you shouldn't cross stuff off in initial. That's a Washington state thing. Idaho's built their counteroffer right on into their contract. So you check the box on line 47, see on acceptance, you put in the date, October 22nd, you put in the time. It's already built into their offer, and their offer negotiation actually takes place on the page, I think it's page 8 or 9 of their contract. And you could say right here, signature subject to acceptance, or signature, and you check the counteroffer attached addendum, and they throw in an addendum. Let's go to the next one, Washington. We have 50% of our counteroffers where we're using the counteroffer addendum, the Form 36. I guess that's my New Year's resolution, you guys, is to have you use the Forms 36 more often than you have in the past, because the way the state of Washington looks at the counteroffer addendum, once that box down below of the Form 36 is mutual or signed by the alternative party that's receiving the counteroffer addendum, then it's mutual. And that is the date, even if the forms are all messed up or you're missing initials, the counteroffer Form 36 holds that much weight in the state of Washington that the auditor and the state of Washington looks at the counteroffer Form 36 as the mutual date. Counteroffer is accepted, done deal. That's what we have to work from. If only 50% are using the Form 36, then there could potentially be some areas of opportunity or areas for the buyer to back out if you have not properly crossed off and initialed by both parties all changes on the Washington State Purchase and Sale Agreement. And as many of you know, that Washington State Purchase and Sale Agreement has had addenda after addenda after addenda added to it. And if you're missing something, you have a chance that it might not be mutually accepted. So I'd like to see you guys use the Form 36. This is a great example. I used it purposely. This is one of my past transactions where you specify on your Form 36 the specific terms that you are changing. So when you are representing the seller, you'll have to go through with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that you have properly countered the appropriate changes that need to be made, because once this is agreed upon, once the Form 36 is agreed upon, everything behind it, in fact, the Form 21, the 22A, 22D, what if you're missing an initial on the 22D, for example? The Form 36 is the mutual acceptance agreement, and all of this takes priority over everything else throughout the contract, okay? Let's go to the next slide. So here is the top 10. Drum roll, please. Number one, you would think it would be price. It was certainly price, but a close second would be your closing date. That is the most countered item that I'm seeing when I reviewed over 100 transactions in the last day or so. So you want to discuss the moving plans with your clients, with the buyer or the seller. Do that early on in the process. Before you write the offer or the counteroffer, have a conversation with that buyer's agent or that listing agent. Don't text, pick up the phone, have a conversation about the moving plans. Don't maybe talk about closing date, talk about the moving plans. Like, what have you guys lined up? What's kind of, are they going to be hiring professional movers? Those are some of the questions that you want to ask. Honor before language still would work, or sooner. I see a lot of that. But you know what? It's actually better to have an actual date to work with because of walkthroughs, because of possession, because of verification of funds. Those are just 3 examples that came to the top of my mind when I'm talking about why you shouldn't use an honor before language, especially when we have situations after mutual acceptance where the parties are like, yeah, but you said honor before, and we can kind of move things around. Let's firm up those dates, you guys. Let's make sure if we're counter offering, let's go ahead and talk about those moving plans and get that firmed up so that everybody's on the same page. Watch your banking and your escrow and your holidays. Pull out a calendar, actually work from the calendar. And I mean, this was the number one, you guys, closing date. And that seems kind of crazy when you think about it. As far as price, what's the second most countered item? Especially around the holidays, it would be your closing date. Maybe somebody wants to stay in the home for a couple more weeks. Maybe they want to move in a couple weeks. Let's go to number 2. The second one that I identified was the possession date. So, I'm seeing even 2 days after closing, allowing the seller to live there for 2 days is a nice thing to do. It might actually kind of, if you're lowballing and the seller's living in the property or has a renter or has some sort of situation to kind of get things situated, or just honestly wants to get their funds in their own bank account, it does take some time for those funds to actually get from escrow to the seller. So having 2 days after closing is a nice touch. If you're considering, maybe I have not considered that before, and maybe my offers are getting rejected, or we're not getting mutual, or maybe I'm lowballing but not providing some way to negotiate, that might be an area of opportunity for you when he talks about closing date or possession date. Utilization, even if it's 65A or 65B, you need to, if it's more that it's not on the closing date, if possession is not on the closing date, you should have a rental agreement. I'm speaking to the Washington people. Idaho definitely is a lot different world out there. You don't utilize a rental agreement for those circumstances in Idaho, but in Washington, yes, please do, even if it's only 2 days. Make sure you have a 65A or a 65B because it's referenced in the purchase and sale agreement. I have seen that some of you ask for key exchange at recording, so the possession date would say that. I would say that that is an amendment to the agreement of possession that's referenced in the Form 21 or Form 28. So you want to be a bit more clear on the key exchange, especially if you're referencing something. I'm seeing a lot of confusion and challenges when it comes to rent closing or possession is not on the closing date. So watch how you reference that on your counteroffer addendum. See how on this one on Form 36, I said Form 21, Term 11, possession date to be September 7th, 2022. And then we also had a 65B that we put into the counteroffer addendum. So that is something you want to make sure that you reference those specific terms, just so we're not, confused when it gets to that point. Let's go to number 3. RENTBACKS. Again, kind of the same vein of thought, right? Is like number 1 is closing date, number 2 is possession, number 3 it's RENTBACKS. And again, we're talking about 65A or 65B in the Washington state contract. The pro question is, what happens if it's more than 30 days? Does the 65A and the 65B cover me? I would say after going through what we've been through with the moratorium and all the law that's been surrounded around that, you probably want an actual rental agreement if it's longer than 30 days. The 65A and 65B are meant to be more short-term situations which allow for that. If it's more than 30 days, you are probably going to want to have your buyer or your seller talk with their attorney. We have attorneys that we can reference here at Best Choice Realty, but you're going to want to probably talk with an attorney if it's going to be more than a 30-day rent back. But that's negotiable, right? As far as how much money is exchanged between the parties on that rent back. And that is something that's taken into consideration. So again, a lot of verbal conversations, a lot of text messages, I'm sure have to be done before you get to this point, but rent back is another counteroffer opportunity. So here's an actual scenario that happened just recently. Can we get an official word from the seller on the change in move in due to the holiday? So moving plans are kind of a little over the place. They could see when they toured the property, there was a lot of moving boxes that were kind of in the living room. So you kind of got a flavor that the sellers were moving out, but we were in the process of writing an offer and countering, and the buyers have their moving company scheduled. They have a large dog transport. I mean, they've got pets, they've got moving plans and a holiday plan in place of like who's coming over for Thanksgiving for the holiday. They are afraid of additional expenses and the cost will cause an issue with their lender. So please consider this with your counteroffer. So this was a text message exchange that I was privy to. And again, we definitely want to negotiate this on the 65A and the 65B. So there would need to be some counteroffering done to accommodate for those additional expenses that were taking place with that particular lender, or that moving plan that's taking place because of the professional mover in place. So again, more conversation needs to take place before we put pen to paper on that counteroffer. But that's the kind of text messages that you can expect and the forms that are associated with that. Number 4, keep it moving here. I know I'm running low on time. It goes really fast tonight. But buyer's loan credits. Again, we are seeing a lot of credit. So if you were not able to attend our lender survivor, that was a lot of discussion that was had with the panel of lenders up on deck as far as survival. And there was a lot of thought around the buy down versus the closing costs. If the seller, like the builder, for example, that I reviewed, they were offering buy downs in the 4.75. There's another one at 4. There was another one at 3.875. They were buying down the rate, and they had the ability to do that because of how they structured their preferred lender situation. So if they're willing to buy down the rate to those amounts, take that incentive. Definitely write that into your counteroffer, or write that into your offer. If you're going to go for the new construction and they're offering some buy down, there is like a 2-1 buy down. There's these buy down options. You're going to want to get more clarity about what that looks like, but it may be in your best interest not to do the temporary buy down, but to instead offer take advantage of maybe a buyer bonus or closing cost credit. That might be a better strategy than a temporary buy down if we are seeing that, or we may anticipate, or our buyer anticipates that the interest rates may go down from 7%, maybe to 6 or to 5. It might make sense to basically negotiate the closing costs rather than the buy down. Again, that's if they're offering that incentive and it's already offered, then make sure it's in your contract. But we're seeing new construction more so than ever before offering to buy down that interest rate. There also are in many examples that I pulled, they're offering throw-in blinds, garage door openers, things like that, appliances, refrigerator, washer, and dryer. Just realize though, with new construction, the margins are very, very thin. They're going through the strain just like we are as real estate brokers. So, I mean, you can't really hit them up on price in new construction, but you certainly have some options as far as preferred lenders using, their incentive for that, buy downs, appliances, blinds, garage door openers, and perhaps some landscaping. Again, it depends on the builder. Again, I'm giving you some rule of thumb just after reviewing 100 transactions and a lot of new construction. That's what I was seeing with the counter offering that was happening with new construction. Closing cost contributions, again, with buyer loan credits, we're seeing negotiation from anywhere from 1% to 3% with buyer loan credits. You want to, if you're going to, let's say that you wrote it up on a Form 21, 22A, Term 3, follow me along. If those of you who are newer, you're going to have to probably reference the contract. But if you're countering, say you're the seller and you get an offer, definitely make sure if you're a new listing agent, basically don't be dumbed and don't be fooled by that very strategic buyer who tucks in a percentage on Form 22A. They'll tuck in like you're going to be paying 1% to 3%, maybe 3% if you're a very good strategic buyer's agent and you know that there's no offers on the table and you want to throw in and kind of throw a new listing agent off their game. Don't be misled because a listing agent often thinks, oh, it's full price because that's what they said in their cover letter. And then they actually go through their offer with their seller. And if you're a very strong, savvy listing agent, you're going to definitely want to look at 22A and go, ooh, they're asking for 3% closing costs paid for by the seller. I definitely have to counter that. And I would need to do that on the Form 36 and reference the modified part of that contract. So it'd be Form 22A, Term 3, seller shall pay 2%. Let's say we're not going to do the 3%. We're going to do only 2%. Seller shall pay 2% of the purchase price, which shall be applied to the buyer's loans and settlement costs, including prepaids, loan discount, loan fee, interest buy down, financing costs, or other costs allowed by the lender. That would be the way to write that into a counteroffer on a Form 36. So you're referencing the part of the contract and you're modifying that contract as follows. So that's what a counteroffer would be. Some of you have never had to do this before, and now we're actually having to negotiate closing costs, which is the number 4. My guess is as we get through the holidays and we go into the first part of the year, you'll see that the buyer loan credits where we negotiate seller paid closing costs will be something that you'll get very, very good at negotiating. But right now we're seeing about 1% to 3% where the sellers are asking, or I'm sorry, the buyers are asking for that. And you're going to have to get good at either crossing that off in Washington and having them initial that change, or going on a Form 36 and actually referencing that part. Number 5 would be personal items. I don't know about you, but I'm experiencing on my listings where they're asking for everything. They're wanting the benches on the front porch. They're asking for the sheds. They're asking for the gazebo. They're asking for the flower pots on the front porch. I sometimes wonder, I kind of joked, I was like, do I work at a furniture store? Because I kind of feel like I'm negotiating their furniture as well. I don't know if you have experienced that, but raise your hand if you have. I mean, I have certainly experienced personal items in the last month in negotiating how that's written up. This would be the appropriate way to counteroffer the language that would be associated with your counteroffering, and you say you're going to include these items at no additional cost, value, or warranty. I like the way that this is structured. Somebody else, I can't remember who did it, but it was a great idea, because once things transfer, then it's like if it's a gazebo and the gazebo breaks down, could they potentially go after the seller for that breakage? If I didn't write it into the contract like this, perhaps, but we want to make it very clear in our counteroffer language. The following items are included with the purchase and sale agreement at no additional cost, value, or warranty. I like the way that that's done. That's purposely done that way for the lender. I'm sure Deanne would be very happy to see her purchase and sale agreement with Mutual with that type of language, so she's not having to deal with the underwriter. That's like, okay, we need to kind of get some more clarity, or can we have another addendum done? All of these things are very specific. Make sure you specify. If it's flower pots, let's specify it. That's on the front porch, or the flower pots that's described in the picture. You know, you can certainly include those types of things, but be very careful about what you're asking for and how you're asking for it. Number 6. Earnest money. Okay, I mean, this still, I think it's like a no-brainer, like it's kind of like, oh, but it's still one of the most counter-offered things. It's, in fact, it will probably rise up as well, just like the seller paid closing costs. But the amount of the earnest money still is countered, and the type of earnest money is still countered. I think the type is countered because we're starting to transition where we have a lot of money that's coming in from overseas, and the sellers are kind of like a little bit risk. They don't want to have that money from overseas, and they're a little bit wanting that money not on a personal check, but they're wanting to see that money in their bank account as soon as possible. So 3 to 5% is still a multiple offer. If you're involved in a multiple offer situation, let's say you only had 3% of your earnest money, you may want to suggest that your buyer go ahead and offer, if you're in a multiple offer situation, and bump that to 5%. We had multiple offers on several of our contracts, and so that was what it did to win, was going from 3 to 5%. So if you're super serious about the deal and you're not wanting to be countered, certainly that 3 to 5% range is a good place to be. I still am coaching my buyers to kind of think about 1 to 3%, because new homes, I did a search on all the new construction around that 750 range. $10,000 is still very, very common. So that's kind of what they're, asking for from the builder, new construction. ACH, wire, cashier's check is still the best for the seller. So if you're wanting to not be countered or not to have that seller feel uncomfortable, maybe you're asking for the world, which you're asking for all those personal items. Maybe you want to bump that earnest money and make that a win for the seller. Again, we're trying to negotiate a win-win for both parties. One way to do that is with showing strength in the amount of earnest money that you're putting up. When it's a low amount, like less than the mortgage, the sellers will often want to counter. That's kind of the rule of thumb that I give my buyers. It's like, okay, let's make it so that the sellers feel like we are super tied into the product or into the property. And so if we only put up $1,000, the sellers are going to think that you're going to want to walk away from the purchase and sale agreement. In Idaho, earnest monies are still very, very low. I just don't know what it is. That's just the way it goes. But if you put up enough earnest money, it definitely shows strength in your offer and your position, your financial strength. So that would be the reason for number 6 to go in that way. Let's go to the next slide. Number 7, in Washington, we're still dealing with the provision in Washington on Section W. My position in Washington has always been that you can go ahead and cross off term W. Just make sure that the buyer and seller initial that cross off. That is considered a counteroffer. From the seller's point of view in the state of Washington, be sure you have completed every single checkbox. Do not go out with a listing and you put up a supplement and the Form 17 maybe it's got some sections that are not completely filled in, even if it's not applicable. Make sure all of those boxes are appropriately checked, because what I'm finding with the sellers is that we have had some incidents where the buyers have used the Form 17, went ahead and contacted their attorney. The attorney reviewed the Form 17, and they attempted to wait to back out of the deal or renegotiate the deal using the Form 17 as their leverage point. So sellers still are asking the buyers to cross off that section of Form 17 and that language of Section W. And they also are coming back, strong sellers, and saying, we need you to waive your right to revoke your offer, or at least understanding that their Form 17 is ironclad, meaning that all of the boxes are checked and it's a solid disclosure. So watch your disclosures if you're representing the seller. Make sure everything's completed. And from the buyer's point of view, be sure there's an initial next to that cross out. Do not let that somebody slip in because you didn't have mutual. Make sure that you have everything buttoned up or that it's referenced on your Form 36. Next slide. Financing contingency terms. So yes, this is still, if I didn't have to, let's say I got a full price offer, but I was a Washington state contract, but I was just like, gosh, dang it. I mean, I need to show my seller that we have a strong qualified buyer. One of the things that I'll spend some time educating my sellers about is the terms on the financing contingency, the Form 22A. And they will often ask me, Rochelle, did you really talk to that lender? Are they pre-qualified? Are they pre-approved? Are they underwritten? Where's their proof of funds? How strong is this buyer? So if you're representing the seller, you better know the terms pre-qualified, pre-approved, underwritten, and proof of funds. And know those terms and know them very well, because your sellers honestly trust you more than you probably should be trusted with knowing the financing terms on 22A. And you have to understand, in Washington, there's a 21-day default where it's actually in the best interest of the buyer, not the seller. So if somebody was to ask me, Rochelle, what is your most, if you had a full price offer, everything was solid, everything was good, what area would you counter to make it more of a seller, where the seller had the win? I would tell you to counter on term 2 and counter from 2A to term 2B, and have the buyer automatically remove the Form 20, their financing contingency on day 22. It automatically waives on day 22 if you counter 22A term 2B to be not 2A. So the default is always, there we go, there's an example, Form 22A, term 2B to be selected, term B to be 14 days. I countered this one, and it was the best path because the lender had to get the appraisal ordered, had to be on point to make sure that they could waive that financing within 2 weeks. Yes, it was a push, but that lender was held to that timeline. So I think that's a very strong point. If you got a full price offer, all things being equal, and you're trying to show strength in your counteroffer, that would be a place that I would spend some time on the Washington State contract. Thank you, Shannon, for going to that. Sellers requesting proof of funds for the down payment. Absolutely. If you get a cash offer, or you get an offer that's got 20% down, there's nothing wrong with asking in your counteroffer to provide proof of funds within 5 days of the 20% down payment. I think that's also acting on the best interest of your seller, showing that there is, proof of funds, that there is the money in the bank account, to carefully. It also kind of puts them on edge, going, oh, the seller is serious about this, right? So number 3, definitely requesting proof of funds for a down payment. That's a strong counteroffer. And proof of funds for cash buyers, or countering with a 22EF in Washington. Very strong plays for number 8 that I saw. Let's go to the next. Pending sales. I want to bring this to your attention. The counteroffer, here's a sample of what the counteroffer addendum looks like in the state of Idaho. So they actually have an addendum that they use, much like the Form 36 that we use, except they have counteroffer 1, they can do counteroffer 2, counteroffer 3. If we have the situation in Washington where we maybe have to counteroffer, we have only one option in Washington. Where Idaho, that you got this counteroffer blank addendum, you just change it to number 2, number 3, number 4, and it's referenced in their purchase and sale agreement. Where in Washington, if let's say I counter Shannon and she's got a buyer that's offering on my listing, and she counters I counter her on a Form 36. Well, what if Shannon's like, I won't go for that price? Should I just cross off her counteroffer and just go with it? She could do that, but that's not a very professional way to go. It's better for Shannon to go ahead and create her own Form 36 and counter my counteroffer. So not to sign off on the Form 36 and get me mutual, but to go ahead and create her own Form 36. Yes, she's going to have to spend some time and type. My gosh, if she actually has to type something, I'm sure she's typed a lot during her days in real estate, but she's going to go ahead and do a Form 36 and another Form 36 and attempt to get the sellers to accept the counter of the counter. So it's called counter offering for a reason. Sometimes it takes a few different counters back and forth before you get mutual acceptance. In Washington, I don't know what it is, but maybe it's because we're not used to using the Form 36, but I would anticipate that we're going to be using more 36s as we go into next year. So let's get good at actually writing the language and using the 36. And I wanted to show Idaho that they actually have to do this. They have to do number 1, they have to do number 2, they have to do number 3. Sometimes they're doing counteroffers 2 or 3 times because many of their counteroffers are, at least in North Idaho, have to do with pending sale contingencies and tightening their timelines or adjusting something in their purchase and sale agreement. So we see a lot of counteroffers in Idaho when it comes to pending sales. 22Q in Washington versus 22B, tighten those timelines. Those are some other counteroffers that I'm seeing a lot of when we're reviewing the offers in Washington. Okay, the last one is price. So I'll end with that. I know I'm a little bit over, I apologize, but on price, as you can see on the left side, it talks about a text message. This is a text message that Shannon actually received recently. And the orange is actually the listing agent. We were representing the buyer. And this is kind of like what not to do. It would have been better if we would have had a conversation instead of a text message. But we actually had to put it's funny because the listing agent didn't do it. We actually had to put the counter offer together because the listing agent didn't do it. They were just verbalizing or in text message. And so we went ahead and just put a Form 36 together. It says, send over the counter offer and it'll be presented. Can't guarantee anything. Latest is 620 with 10,000 in closing costs. That's the best they can do. Let me know. Again, that's all verbal. It's all text message. So Shannon put, if they came down 5,000 from that, we would have a deal. Call me if you want to discuss. We have other houses we're looking at tomorrow though. Again, very good negotiation strategy, Shannon, kind of putting that out there in text. Then he says 615 and 10,000 in closing costs. So we went ahead with the 620 and then the 610, the 10,000 closing costs, and we got it done. So they went ahead with this. And so that was great negotiation. Again, you can do verbal, you can do phone calls, but what really comes down to is what do you put on that Form 36? What is in the contract? What is in writing? All right, Shannon, any questions that came through that I didn't?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to share this too, because we get a lot of questions about how to properly counter. And I know you mentioned it, but I think we've got one on here that it's a good example for you guys to visualize. Okay. So this is the Form 36. So if you're planning on countering, this is the Form 36 that we'd use. This is a sample of what it would look like. And I think we've got it on another slide. Oh, here it is. Okay, perfect. So there's a Form 36, and this is where you would write those changes. And then make sure on the first page of the purchase and sale, you put in that pursuant to in the addenda line. Once you do that, then that 36 basically trumps everything else that's in the contract. So that's how you properly
you put the Form 36 at the beginning, right? So if you are a listing agent and you're like, okay, well, gosh, this is my first time. I can't remember who it was that was their first time. Yeah, you definitely put that on your first page. You have the seller sign off all the pages and initial all the pages. Yeah. And like Shannon says, you put pursuant to Form 36 and that addenda line. Some sellers are still like, oh gosh, I don't want to have, you can still, if they're worried about it on page 1 of the purchase and sale, you can put a red line. But anytime you cross something off in the state of Washington, it requires an initial. So, I have seen some of those offers come through. And I have one auditor that's like, oh, and another auditor is like, it's okay. And so you get this varying degree. You just need to understand that the Form 36 is the form that prioritizes everything else. So it is okay to send the 36, bundle it, put pursuant to Form 36, and just leave everything alone, because that purchase price, in that case, we would have checked the box and wrote the purchase price. That would take priority over that Form 21. Okay. Yeah. But yes, be careful.
So I think too, so especially for you guys who have listings out there right now, sellers that are being really, really firm on price or something like that, a counter offer is a great way for them to feel like they get the win in some ways. So tighten up the timeline. So you know what, we can ask them for that. They're going to get the deal on getting the price, but maybe we tighten up their financing or we remove their title contingency. Those are all things that you can work with your seller to determine what they think would be best in their offer. So this one is a good example here that's on the screen. It talks about adding a form. So it's like tidy items in a way as a listing agent, where you can be like, okay, let's tighten up that 22A. There's a couple terms that are on there. Maybe shorten up the inspection time frame. Looks like the 22T was tightened, and then some of the items that were on the 22D to clean up. It's like use the Form 36 to clean up all those things before you're mutually signed around.
And then my client just went ahead and initialed everything, like all the pages. So once the Form 36 was sent over, This counteroffer is sent to the firm. So it's sent to the buyer agent firm and to the buyer's agent. And then the buyer, to make it mutual, would just go ahead on this example and sign off on that bottom box. That's what would make it mutual. Now, if Shannon said, you know what, that's not going to work for me, I don't want to have my inspection cut down to 1 day, Shannon would have to go back to the Form 36, not sign this one, create a new 36, put that on the first page, and send everything else back to the listing agent. And then if the listing agent agreed with everything, then the seller would agree to the counteroffer, and that would be accepted. So hopefully that gives you some more clarity on how to maneuver using the Form 36 tonight in Washington.
Yeah.
But only 50% are using the 36 properly. So we do need some more education on that. If you have any questions, make sure you ask Candace, ask me, ask Shannon. We'd be happy to go over any situations or scenarios with you one-off. But hopefully that was helpful to give you the insight you need.
Yep, and I think we've got a couple extra questions for those who want to linger around for, I guess, the after party here. But they're saying, can we use a Form 34 or Form 36 to firm up on or before language? And I believe you've answered that question, Rochelle. Yes, you can use the Form 34 or the 36 to firm up that.
Yep.
And then 20 days fund buyer twist, 20 days close via lender pre-approval, and 21-day default. Yeah, it's interesting how those things will come together, Deanna.
Yep. The other piece I would say is some of these old dogs, I don't know about you, but I'm an old dog now. We don't use 34 for counteroffer. We use 36. So I don't know if that's something you were thinking, I could just counteroffer on a 34. It would be better to do a 36. It's once you get mutual acceptance, that's when you may need to do a 34 to amend, to do an amendment. That's what I would think of the 34 for. Yeah. So if you do need to do an amendment, that's what you would use the 34. 36 is for counteroffering to get mutual acceptance.
Yeah. And I think too, from being out in the field, you kind of can tell sometimes the mastery of the forms, it does kind of posture you up in terms of representation with your seller. It makes it so easy for them to understand the forms from a consumer perspective rather than seeing cross-outs everywhere. I mean, it's just cleaner for them. They can actually very clearly understand what's going on and follow.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
All right. You guys have a great evening. We'll talk to you next Monday. And it's the holiday season, so there is a lot more activity. And the great news from Deanne, that starts us off really well. So we have a lot of good things going. Get out there, make contact with your buyers and your sellers. We're seeing a lot of good things coming through now. So it's exciting to see that we'll be able to turn the corner here very shortly. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.